a change on the part of the creature. And so I hear what you're saying, and what it flows from is the unusualness. Notice in 126, when Paul says, "For even their women." That term wouldn't be there if this was not some illustration of what he's saying, of the extremes to which the change in the relationship between the Creator and the creation goes because of sin. And so what you're hearing, and I'm sorry that you interpret it in the way that you do, but I understand what you're saying. What you're hearing is the recognition that the lust of a man for a woman is of a different character creation-wise than the lust of a man for a man. Doesn't mean either one of them is not going to separate you from God. But there is do you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Let me maybe phrase my question slightly differently. Let me put it this way. When you speak of, let's talk about this in the context of someone who has always been a committed Christian, discovers that he has attractions to the guys and not to girls, does his best not to lust, never acts on them, commits himself to lifelong celibacy. I understand speaking about that as I understand where you're talking about broken, where the term broken is coming from. The Catholic Church, I think, talks about disordered sexuality. I understand where that's coming from. What I'm asking, I guess, is from you, when you speak about that as being broken in the sense that it's divergent from the created order, do you mean in the same way that a deaf person not being able to hear is broken and a result of the fall, though not their own fault? Or do you mean in a way that you are suggesting that this individual, in spite of the fact that he's done everything feasibly that he could do to follow the Scriptures and to follow Christ, in spite of his temptations, that he is somehow still responsible, that it's broken because of his sin?
No, my focus, when I talk about the focus I just tried to place upon it, is the nature of the desire. It has nothing to do with whether this person has done as much as this person over here to not look at pornography or to not inflame their desires or anything along those lines. I think what you're hearing when you hear us talking about this particular subject is the fact that it's used as an illustration of the twisting of the creator-creation relationship, and that there is a clear created order in the male and female relationship that is being twisted in this situation. And that is not the same thing as saying, well, you just haven't done enough. Because I know people like you just described. But I'm out of time, and it's my turn to start, I guess. But is that all right? We reset and go from there? Okay, all right. So let me ask you a question, and we can just continue on with it. Would you see, especially in light of what we see of the homosexual community — I don't like that term because it's too diverse, and as you say, you don't want to be held accountable for the guys in the Gay Pride March, sure. and I don't like the broad brush. But most of the sexual studies that I've heard, like the McQuarrie States study, indicate that especially amongst male homosexuals, there is a tremendously elevated amount of promiscuity as far as number of partners and things like that on average. Would you not agree that there seems to be a much elevated danger of taking this set of desires and identifying the entirety of one's life on the basis of those desires over against almost any other sin that we could talk about?
So I would say there are kind of two things in there I would want to respond to. The first one is the idea that that there's all this promiscuity in the gay community. There certainly is promiscuity among gay men. But it's also been, I think, the studies have shown, vastly overstated. One of the studies that's been cited quite frequently, I think, including by you, and I'm not sure which study you were referring to just now. I will.
The Macquarie State University study.
Yeah, I'll have to look that one up.
That's from Australia.
But
Australians are weird, so maybe that's
sure. But without the specific studies aren't even that important as far as to say that in many of these cases we're looking at folks who we're looking at studies that had very specific parameters. Studies where, for instance, they were interviewing gay men, and the gay men being interviewed were gay men who were going to a clinic because of fears of HIV and AIDS or something like that. Many of the studies, monogamous folks were explicitly excluded. I mean, there are a lot of things. Now, I would have to look up that specific study, and I can do that. But I just wanted, to be fair, I think it's important not to overstate things and suggest that gay men, on the average, have just tons and tons of partners. Quite recently, in fact, there was a study done by OkCupid, of all things, the dating site, which has a lot of young members. Of their many, many, many members, and they found that the number of self-reported sexual partners among gay folks was exactly the same as the number of self-reported sexual partners of straight folks. Now, as a Christian, I believe that that number being more than one, or if we're talking about gay folks in the context of saying, gay sex is always sinful, that number being more than 0 is sinful regardless. But I don't think it's fair to just sort of paint with a broad brush and suggest that gay men are all sort of promiscuous and all this kind of stuff. I do know a lot of folks who are monogamous. I know lots of folks who are celibate, so I think that's important. In terms of identity, like I said earlier, one of the reasons that I don't like the word homosexual in that context is that to me that is an identity with a sexual behavior, or at the very least a sexual feeling, which to me the word gay has a much broader meaning than that. In terms of, when I tell you that I'm gay, you know a lot of things about me. You know that my brain is, for whatever reason, apparently wired differently from most men's. You know that I am not attracted to women.